This is FemiDlive. A great talk show unravels your thinking, makes you stop to listen, engages you in a debate of opinions.
I believe this man knows what he is doing. He is a Nigerian.
And ultimately brings you to the king of talk radio, FemiDlive.
Thanks for joining in and welcome to FemiDlive today. I am Femi D. Now, it's been an interesting day for me because I spent a good time with researchers, with scholars who are now ready and have stepped forward to say this is how we observed and this is what we now know about the 2015 Nigerian elections. Yes, you know, typically before an election takes place in any country, it's almost impossible for an incumbent to be kicked out or voted out of power. But then, what are the factors that really played a significant role in the loss of the election for President Jonathan at the time, and now President Muhammadu Buhari taking over at the point in time? President Jonathan did run on the platform of the People's Democratic Party, PDP, as we know them. President Muhammadu Buhari, who is the current president, who was the challenger, did run on the platform of the All Progressive Congress. Now, I spent some good time today with scholars who say, we now know the magic behind the numbers. We now know the reasons why people decided to vote differently from what is expected to vote. It was a big surprise, as many of you would recall, that an incumbent could lose an election at a time when a lot of people felt in Africa, no matter what happens, no matter who's the electoral umpire, it is who sits. It is he who is on the throne that gets to wear the seatbelt and stay firm and not lose his position. But now, it's interesting to understand a little bit about what may have happened. Now, this political scientist that I did spend some time with today did make it straightforward to me. The study was not even as much as about the candidates, as much as it was about the parties, as much as it was about how the people think and how they thought, and the response to the situations they found on ground. Whether you're talking about impunity, corruption, poverty, violence, ethnic violence, and the likes of it, you name it, poverty, it all goes in. And those were some of the key reasons that you would find on how they voted. I was talking earlier today with Associate Professor Dr. Carl Levan, and he had some interesting points from his lecture where he talked about now that we're in the political transition, where we are at that point where political parties are ready to compete against each other again. What are the things to look forward to? What are the cues? What are the things you see that you think was happening now? One of my favorite questions in recent times has always been, so what would you be voting for? We've talked about water. They've told us about electricity several times. They've told us about water. In fact, they've told us so much stories about the social amenities that can be provided. And they've talked about the 5,000. They talked about all the Greek-like gifts, even buying of corn, even stomach infrastructure. I mean, these are all devices that you use to win the electorate over to your side. It's all being said. I mean, if there's a book to look forward to say when you're trying to get someone to come to your side, the plan is exhausted. So what exactly will 68 political parties in Nigeria be telling, if not more than 68 by the time we get to election, what will 68 political parties be telling you on why you should vote for them in 774 local governments, and then of course in 36 states? What will they be telling you? What will be that convincing point? So we decided to kick back a little bit to look at, in 2015, what were some of those key things that really helped people to push over to one side over the other. And I tell you this, there are numbers to back this up, but there were some very interesting ideas that Dr. Carl Levan put forward. Of course, is with the American University School of International Service, American University, Washington, D.C. And our interaction was kind of very productive. It talked about the fact that, see, it's been observing elections in Nigeria since 1999. In fact, he was in Nigeria in 1999 at the point where we're getting legislators, people who are now going to govern and create laws, I beg to say, create laws for the land that they were going to be in charge of. who had no idea. And he talked about the fact that 80% of Nigerian lawmakers at the time had no idea what it meant to be a lawmaker in a democratic era, such as when we found ourselves in the First Republic in 1999 when President Obasanjo was coming in. And as you know, celebrations cannot be oversaid. The June 12 will now be our Democracy Day. That's a subject I like to treat in another day. But what's the science behind elections? I like this. The science behind Nigerian elections. Is there really a logic to some sense of what some people say, our perceived madness when it comes to elections? Somebody who's been bragging all day long in front of his yard before election starts to say, see, where I am voting for candidate A over B over C. And then election time comes, somebody brings cooked rice and says, no, I don't want cooked rice, I want raw rice. And then and the other one brings raw rice, somebody brings raw rice and tomato, and they ditch the guy with the rice without the tomato to vote differently. And don't let me even go into what the women would do, because of course their own criteria or their own buying votes, if I would say, the criteria can be extensive. If you have chicken, you never can tell live chicken or dead chicken. Any one of them could really convince them to vote. But what's the science behind how Nigerians did vote in 2015? Of course, literacy level was one of those key things. There was the state debt. Now, let me talk about the literacy level. I was looking at the numbers produced by Dr. Carl Levan, and you'll be surprised that in some states of this federation, the literacy level, as at the time they were voting, was as high as 95.6. Some others recorded 97.1, and these are local governments in Nigeria. I'm not trying to pick on anyone. For example, in Abia North and Aba South, the literacy level around what they are voting about, or what they are voting for, the real issues of voting in itself was almost not relevant to them. So their literacy level was and yes, of course, they could only speak one language at the time, and that's likely their local language. So if you're going to be speaking to them to convince them to vote for you, and you're not speaking their language, which could also be beyond money and other facilities, well, you are definitely not going to be getting their attention. And this, by the way, spreads across the number of local governments we have across the state. So different states reacted to different political actors and parties alike. Some reacted with good numbers, some reacted differently. Some reacted along the lines of what their godfathers really did say they should do. There was the state debt ratio. So some governors felt, well, since we're in debt, if you say we should jump, we'll jump. The question would be, how high should we jump? How much do we owe? How much do we need? Okay, if you pay us this money to sort out our people and our state affairs, we could just determine how high the people in our state will join. Then, of course, there was the issue of the voter turnout in 2015 compared to 2011. The internally generated revenue. How much did some states generate that they would have notable reason to vote differently from whoever was helping their situation? You don't bite your helper. My helper, you don't go after your helper. What was the recurrent debt? But I think above all this description, so few things stand out outrightly true. We have 68 political parties, but we are trying to preach the fact that we are not running a two-party system. When I say two-party system, the People's Democratic Party and the All Progressive Congress, those are two most prominent parties we have in Nigeria. And so few things made them different from each other in 2015 elections as we look at the science behind how Nigerians voted in that election. Why did the PDP lose in 2015? One of the key reasons they say, from the findings Dr. Carr put forward, is the erosion of the elite bargain that the 1999 transition facilitated the defeat of the PDP, but its lingering footprints impede democracy today. So that's one of the reasons. Of course, there were implications as regards inter-ethnic cooperation as well. That's one of the reasons. So the leading candidate, the presidential candidate, it's not from a major tribe or it's from a different tribe. That played a part in how the parties competed against themselves in 2015. There was the issue of hate speech. Oh dear Lord, I remember those moments. It rings like a bell. I even have like a ringtone in my head, the woman who spoke about it. Then of course there was the negative evaluations and performance of the current administration at the time in 2015 under President Jonathan. The economy is this, the economy is that, there were low income levels and all kinds of stuff. And that was the message of the All Progressive Congress. In fact, I found out today that the media and essentially the issues the All Progressive Congress focused more as they were exposed in the media was twice it was exposed twice the rate of the People's Democratic Party. In other words, if the APC did their hard work to get 80, that means the PDP did 40. The stories carried, the news, the where you find the stories about the APC and the PDP, it was twice the number in that very year leading up to that election. So that's one of the reasons. And of course, the more we're exposed to what we hear, I guess that also played a role, one way or the other, in how things would go, or how things did turn out. And of course, there were strong influences from different parties. The terrorism was another issue. Terrorism. Okay, so a lot of people before the 2015 elections, 95% actually of Nigerians, according to this research and poll taken up by Gallup poll in 2015, believe that 95% of people believed that Boko Haram was a major threat now to that very election. And they believed, literally, with strong views, that if President Jonathan had won, then the country would have gone AWOL. And if President Buhari, who is the current president now, didn't win, who knows what would have happened. Another thing you'll find in the book that will come out later this year talks about the fact that there were worries about the extreme views. If Jonathan were re-elected and if Buhari was not elected, there were going to be a negative coefficient of things that will happen. There was the link between state of impunity and the salience of sectarian identities and so much more in that regard. So how did they argue out this? So in the order of importance in 2015 election, you voted that the most important issue to you was economy and corruption. Then followed by electoral integrity. Was INEC going to be free and fair? Then insecurity or security in itself, party politics and social issues. That's the order which things did follow in that very election and how things did play out in that same sequence of election. But you want to ask yourself some very key things. What do we do with all what we now know at how we voted? What influenced our thinking as a people in 2015? What really made us think really deep, big, and say, oh yes, we're going to take a chance on the All Progressive Congress? Do some of those things really do matter now? The issue of Boko Haram, does it still get you to keep them in power or kick them out of power? Keep or kick out of power? The issue of the economy, is it in a state where you keep them or kick them out of power? I'm not even suggesting the alternatives, guys, because as I say, if you kick or keep, now that depends on what alternative would provide, what other party can provide a meaningful alternative to keep or keep. Kick or keep now, them in power. What are the other things? What are the issues? Are we still subscribing to the we versus them issue that we would find? In fact, let me allow you listen very quickly to a little bit of the interview I had with Dr. Carl Levan earlier today. He talked about how our democracy, where it is now, is it as young as we think it is? 1999 till next year is going to be 20 years. So are we still young to make some mistakes, or are we overdue in the way things are? Listen to his response.
I think the first part of my answer to that question would be to say that it's no longer quite the nascent democracy that we always thought it was. That certainly the defeat of a ruling party, even after 16 years, or especially after 16 years, truly was a milestone. And I think one of the key findings from my research is that the source of that historic change in party power was driven by voters and was driven by the issues that voters cared about.
So you want to move away from that and ask yourself, are you still having the same struggle with voting, or do you think you would have struggled voting in 2019 like you voted in 2015? Do you think it's the same issues that confronted you in 2015 that would determine how you vote in 2019? Well, what issues really matter?
Well, one message is that issues are really starting to matter in Nigeria. And when the issues were negatively framed in terms of the opposite party, those kinds of issues tended to backfire on the party. And also that the issues were of substantive concern to Nigerians. So I show, I think persuasively, that the economy and corruption were the single most important issues in 2015. I can't say if that will be the range of issues for 2019, but that was very important. And I also think that it is an encouraging sign that electoral integrity as an issue was talked about more by the parties and that it was valued by the parties. And across 5 different issues that I looked at, there was a significant difference between what the parties talked about. They campaigned on different things, and I think those differences mattered.
So there's the issue of how parties should approach how they think about things. Are they thinking correctly? You think about it. Is there a strategy to get to the heart of Nigerians?
The results that I showed were only relevant for 2015, but I think that there are certainly some important lessons. And I think one of those lessons is that parties really do need to talk about issues, and they need to think very strategically about what the right issues are for winning.
So what would be the winning points?
Again, I don't think we know what those are, and I think the parties are still coming together. And I think, my message to them and what they need to think about based on the facts that I presented and the analysis that I presented is that they need to think carefully about the issues that they campaign on. In 2015, I found that security and terrorism mattered a little bit less than I expected. It still certainly mattered, and there's no doubt that the Bring Back Our Girls campaign, undercut the credibility of the PDP. And there still is plenty of time left in 2018 for the economy to change and the security situation to change. So I think, they need to figure out what voters care about, and they need to craft a clear message that speaks to what voters talk about.
So we have a new set of voters possibly coming on the scene. A lot of new young people who have picked up their PVCs and going to be part of the electorate for 2019 elections. Are you concerned that the strategy in which these parties will need to deploy to appeal to them may need to change?
I think that the strategies for appealing to voters has already begun to change, and I think it's begun to change slowly and in an encouraging way, and that's why it may not be such a nascent democracy anymore. I'm also encouraged by what I've heard so far from civil society observers such as Election Monitor and others about the continuous voter registration process. I think it's very interesting and perhaps important that some of the highest rates of voter registration have been in parts of the country which are now opposition held. This is what you would expect, but I think continuous voter registration is, seems to be an important institutional reform. And, the next step, I think, is for the parties to figure out how to mobilize those new voters. One of the key findings that I highlighted today is that the average age of a politician since 1999 has gotten older in every single election. The average age of the voter is, of course, 18, but the country has gotten younger and the politicians have gotten older.
In essence, what I've just provided, thanks to Dr. Carl Levan and the discussion we had today, it tells you the science behind elections, or 2015 elections. What were people thinking on how they voted? What were you thinking when you voted in 2015? Did you think rightly? Now that you think about it, do you think you were thinking rightly? I wonder if you think so. Well, let me know what your thoughts are. Send me your comments on Twitter at FemiDlive. The same handle works on Instagram, Facebook. That's at FemiDlive on Twitter as well. Yes, email femid@live.com. Send me an email. But we'll look forward to Dr. Carl Levan's book later this year. It will tell you a lot more. It's about 40 chapters in total, and it says a lot about what 2015 elections are. And will the outcome of this book, would it move you a little bit as regards what you think things will be? And remember, you can always watch a good episode of some of our past editions on YouTube. Yes, at FemiDlive on YouTube. And of course, 20 leading platforms now carry this very podcast, including Amplified Radio, Stitcher, TuneIn, Apple Store, Castbox. I can go on naming them. These 20, that's a lot of names anyway. You can imagine if I have 20 kids, how much trouble I'll be in. But thanks for listening for this edition. What's the science behind elections? Are you still thinking what you thought when you voted in 2015? We can only find out if the same thing reigns in your mind in 2019. I'm Femi D.
This is Femi D Live.
Nothing breaks the news like the news. Trust me, I can prove it. I'm ready. Let's take on the biggest debates on radio provide insights, experience, and build an unforgettable discussion together. I am FemiD Amelin. Let's talk with FemiDlive is on.